The rain hammered against the metal roof of the abandoned warehouse like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside, curled up in the darkest corner behind a pile of rusted machinery, something small and scaled shivered in the cold. The young dragon's golden eyes reflected the occasional flash of lightning that crept through broken windows, but she quickly closed them whenever the light grew too bright. "Nobody wants me," she whispered to herself for the 100th time that night. Her voice was barely audible over the storm, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. Zara was barely the size of a house cat, though her species would normally grow to the size of ancient earth dragons from human fairy tales. But she had been cast out before she could grow, before she could learn to fly properly, before she could even breathe fire more than a few weak sparks. The Council of Elder Dragons had made their decision 3 months ago, and their words still echoed in her mind like a curse. Defective, they had declared. Her flame burns too weak. Her scales lack the proper shine. She brings shame to our noble bloodline. The council had banished her from Dracaris Prime, the crystal world where dragons had ruled for 10,000 years. They had stripped her of her family name, her birthright, and her future. Worse still, they had broadcast her exile across the galactic communication networks, ensuring that no other dragon colony would take her in. She was marked as unwanted, a failure, a genetic mistake that should be forgotten. For weeks, she had drifted through space in an old escape pod she had stolen from the docks. She had no money, no friends, and no skills that anyone seemed to value. Every planet she visited turned her away. The proud Altarian Empire wanted nothing to do with a defective dragon. The trading guilds of Centauri Station laughed at her when she begged for work. Even the pirate havens of the Outer Rim refused to shelter her, claiming that a weak dragon was worse than useless. That had led her here, to this forgotten corner of human space, to a world called New Birmingham that specialized in industrial manufacturing. It was not a beautiful planet. The skies were usually gray with factory smoke, and the cities sprawled in ugly concrete blocks between massive refineries and shipyards. But it was also a place where nobody asked too many questions about your past, where even aliens could find work if they were desperate enough. Zara had been hiding in this warehouse for 3 days now, surviving on rainwater and the occasional scrap of food she could steal from garbage containers. She had tried to find legitimate work, but every human she approached took one look at her small size and weak appearance and shook their heads. Humans, it seemed, expected dragons to be mighty and powerful. They wanted creatures who could lift heavy machinery, breathe fire to power furnaces, or provide security with their fearsome presence. What they did not want was a young dragon who could barely lift her own weight and whose fire was weaker than a cigarette lighter. The thunder grew louder, and Zara pressed herself deeper into her hiding spot. She was so focused on staying warm and dry that she almost missed the sound of footsteps outside the warehouse. Heavy boots splashed through puddles, growing closer to her refuge. Her heart began to race. Had someone found her? Were they coming to chase her away again? She held her breath and tried to make herself even smaller, wrapping her thin tail around her body like a golden rope. The footsteps stopped directly outside the main entrance. There was a moment of silence, then, the screech of metal as someone forced open the rusted door. A beam of bright light cut through the darkness, attached to some kind of portable lamp. "Hello," called a voice. It was male, human, with a strange accent she had never heard before. "Anyone in here?" I saw movement through the window. Zara remained perfectly still, hoping the human would decide he had been mistaken and leave. But the footsteps began moving through the warehouse, and the light swept back and forth across the empty space. She could hear him muttering to himself as he walked. "Bloody rain's coming through the roof again. Going to ruin half the equipment if I don't get this fixed soon." The realization hit her like a cold wave. This was not just any human. This was someone who owned or worked in the warehouse. She was trespassing, and she had just been discovered by the worst possible person. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. Would he call the authorities? Would they arrest her and send her back to Dracaris Prime to face worse punishment? Would they simply throw her in prison on this human world? The light was getting closer now. She could see the human's shadow moving across the wall, growing larger as he approached her hiding place. In desperation, she scrambled deeper behind the machinery, trying to find a way out. But her small claws slipped on the wet metal, and she knocked over a piece of loose equipment with a loud clang. The footsteps stopped immediately. "Who's there?" the voice called, sharper now. "I know someone's back there."
Come out where I can see you. Zara realized she had no choice. She was trapped, and hiding would only make things worse when she was inevitably found. With her heart pounding like a drum, she slowly crawled out from behind the machinery and into the beam of the human's light. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that were soaked with rain. He had short brown hair and kind brown eyes, though those eyes widened considerably when they focused on her small form. He was probably in his 30s, with calloused hands that spoke of years of manual labor. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Zara had never been this close to a human before. She had heard they were primitive compared to most galactic species, still using crude chemical rockets and fossil fuels while other civilizations had mastered faster than light travel centuries ago. But this human did not look primitive. He looked concerned. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly, lowering his light so it would not blind her. "You're just a little thing, aren't you? What's a dragon doing hiding in my warehouse?" The kindness in his voice was so unexpected that Zara nearly burst into tears. After months of rejection and cruelty, she had forgotten that anyone could speak to her without hatred or disgust. Her voice caught in her throat as she tried to answer. "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll leave right away. Please don't call the authorities." The human's expression grew even more concerned. He crouched down to her level, making himself smaller and less intimidating. "Hey now, nobody's calling anyone. You look half frozen and scared out of your mind. What's your name, little one?" "Zara," she replied, still not quite believing this was happening. "I'm Zara." "I'm Marcus Chen," the human said, extending one large hand toward her. When she flinched away, he quickly pulled it back. "I'm an engineer. I run this place, fix things that break, build things that people need. And right now, what I need to know is why a young dragon is hiding in my warehouse instead of being with her family." The question opened wounds that Zara thought had begun to heal. All the pain and loneliness came rushing back, and, before she could stop herself, she was telling Marcus everything. She told him about the council's judgment, about her exile, about the months of wandering and rejection. She told him about her weak flame and her small size, about the way other dragons looked at her with disgust and disappointment. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail of her story. When she finally finished, he was quiet for a long time, processing what he had heard. "Let me get this straight," he said finally. "Your own people threw you out because you're not big enough or strong enough to meet their standards?" Zara nodded miserably. "I'm defective. I'm a failure as a dragon." Marcus's face hardened in a way that made Zara suddenly remember that humans, despite their primitive technology, had a reputation as warriors throughout the galaxy. There was something dangerous in his eyes, something that spoke of deep anger barely held in check. "That's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard," he said, his voice low and intense. "You're not defective. You're just young and scared and alone. And any species that throws out their own children because they don't meet some arbitrary standard can go to hell as far as I'm concerned." The fierce protectiveness in his voice shocked Zara to her core. No one had ever defended her before, not even her own parents. She stared at this human stranger who barely knew her and felt something warm kindle in her chest, something she had thought was gone forever. Hope. Marcus stood up and looked around the warehouse, his engineering mind already working on practical problems. "First things first, we need to get you warm and dry and fed. Then, we can figure out what comes next." He walked over to a wall panel and flipped several switches. Lights came on throughout the warehouse, revealing a space much larger than Zara had realized. Along one wall stood several pieces of advanced machinery, things she recognized as fusion welders and gravity manipulators. This was not the primitive workshop she had expected. "Come on," Marcus said, gesturing for her to follow. "I've got a small apartment upstairs. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry, and I can make you something to eat." Zara hesitated, unable to believe this was really happening. "You want me to stay? But I'm just a burden. I can't do anything useful." Marcus turned back to her with a smile that was somehow both gentle and fierce. "Little one, I've been working alone in this place for 3 years, fixing broken equipment and building custom machinery for anyone who can pay. I could use the company, even if all you do is sit in the corner and tell me about your day. But something tells me you're capable of a lot more than you think."
He started walking toward a staircase at the far end of the warehouse, then paused when he realized she was not following.
Zara, he said softly. Nobody's going to hurt you here.
This is my place, and I don't let people I care about get hurt. You can stay as long as you need to, whether that's a day or a year or forever. No conditions, no expectations.
Just a safe place to be yourself.
The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. Zara had not cried since her exile began, had not dared to show such weakness in front of strangers. But Marcus was not a stranger anymore, somehow. He was something she had never had before. He was hope made real. Still crying, she followed him up the stairs to whatever came next, carrying with her the first genuine kindness she had known in her short, difficult life. The apartment above the warehouse was small but clean, with a tiny kitchen, a living area filled with technical books and half-finished inventions, and a bedroom that Marcus immediately offered to share. Not in any inappropriate way, he assured her quickly, but simply because it was the warmest room and she needed to get the chill out of her bones. As Marcus busied himself making hot soup and finding blankets, Zara curled up on his couch and tried to understand what was happening to her. For the first time in months, she felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt truly wanted. And, as she watched this human stranger move around his small home, preparing a place for her as if she belonged there, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had finally found where she was meant to be. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside Marcus Chen's workshop, a young dragon who had been nobody's wanted child was slowly learning what it felt like to have a home.
The warm soup Marcus made was unlike anything Zara had ever tasted.
It was simple human food, vegetables and broth with some kind of grain, but it filled the empty ache in her stomach and spread warmth through her small body. She ate slowly, savoring each spoonful while Marcus sat across from her at his tiny kitchen table. "So," he said, sipping his own bowl, "tell me about your abilities. And I don't want to hear about what you can't do compared to other dragons.
I want to know what you can do, period." Zara hesitated, and used to thinking about herself in positive terms.
"I can fly," she said slowly. "Not very fast or very high, but I can stay airborne for several hours without getting tired."
Marcus nodded encouragingly.
"That's useful."
"What else?" "I can see very well in the dark.
And I can hear things that are very quiet or very far away." She paused, then added reluctantly, "My fire is weak, but I can control it very precisely. I can make it hot enough to melt copper, or cool enough to warm food without burning it." "Precise control," Marcus repeated, his eyes lighting up with interest.
"That's not weakness, Zara. That's skill.
Most of my welding work requires exact temperature control. Too hot and you ruin the metal, too cool and the bond doesn't hold. Precise flame control is worth its weight in platinum in this business."
Zara blinked in surprise.
She had never thought of her defective flame as a skill before.
"Really?
Really?
What about your size?"
"I know you think being small is a disadvantage, but I work on a lot of equipment with internal components that are hard to reach.
Having someone small enough to get inside complex machinery could save me hours of disassembly time."
A warm feeling was growing in Zara's chest, something she barely recognized as pride. Marcus was not just being kind, he was seeing genuine value in the traits that had made her an outcast among her own people.
"There's something else," she said hesitantly. "I can sense electromagnetic fields. Circuits, power sources, that kind of thing."
"Other dragons think it's useless because we don't work with technology much, but I can tell when something's about to fail or when current isn't flowing properly."
Marcus set down his spoon and stared at her. "You can sense electrical problems before they happen?"
"Usually, yes.
There's a feeling when something's wrong. Like a discord in a song."
"Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed.
"Zara, do you have any idea how valuable that ability is?"
"I spend half my time troubleshooting electrical problems that could be solved in minutes if I could sense what you can sense. You're not defective, you're a diagnostic miracle." The pride in Zara's chest grew stronger, but it was mixed with confusion and old pain.
"Then, why did the council exile me? If these abilities are useful, why didn't they see it?"
Marcus's expression darkened again. "Because they're idiots who can only see value in things that fit their narrow definition of what a dragon should be. They want big, scary fire breathers who can intimidate their enemies and show off their power.
They don't understand that true strength comes in many forms. He leaned forward, his voice intense but gentle. Zara, I've been around the galaxy a bit. I've worked with dozens of species, built equipment for everyone from Centaurian merchants to Altarian nobles. And, you know what I've learned? The most powerful beings in the universe aren't always the biggest or the strongest or the loudest. They're the ones who can adapt, who can think, who can solve problems that others can't even see. Marcus stood up and began pacing around his small kitchen, his engineering mind clearly working on something. You know what humans are famous for in this galaxy? We're the species that everyone calls primitive and backwards. We don't have the psychic abilities of the Altarians or the natural technology interfaces of the Signans. We can't fly like the Avians or live for millennia like the Eternal Ones. But we survive, he continued, stopping to look at her directly. We adapt. We take what others consider weaknesses and turn them into strengths. We build tools to do what our bodies can't. We work together to overcome problems that would destroy other species. And we never, ever throw away someone just because they're different. Zara felt something shifting deep inside her, like a wall that had been built around her heart was starting to crumble. Is that why you're helping me? Because humans don't abandon people? I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do, Marcus said simply. But also because I think we could help each other. I need a partner, someone who can work with me on the complex projects I take on. And you need a place where your abilities are valued instead of dismissed. He sat back down and reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her small clawed hand. I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. You've been through hell, and you need time to heal and think. But if you want it, I'm offering you a home here. A real home, not just a place to hide. As a partner, he added. Not as some kind of charity case or pet. As someone whose skills complement mine, whose perspective makes my work better. Because I think that's exactly what you could be, if you're willing to try. Zara stared at his outstretched hand, so large compared to her own, and felt tears threatening again. What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint you like I disappointed the council? Marcus's voice was firm when he answered. The council's standards were wrong, Zara. They judged you against an ideal that values the wrong things. My standards are different. I care about integrity, curiosity, hard work, and kindness. From what I've seen tonight, you have all of those in abundance. Slowly, carefully, Zara reached out and touched his hand with the tip of one small claw. His skin was warm and rough with calluses, but gentle when he closed his fingers loosely around hers. I'd like to try, she whispered. I'd like to have a home. Marcus smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Then, welcome home, partner. Later that night, as Zara curled up in the warm bed that Marcus had insisted she take while he slept on the couch, she reflected on the impossible turn her life had taken. This morning she had been a homeless outcast, unwanted and alone. Tonight she was part of something, valued for who she was instead of rejected for who she wasn't. Through the window, she could see the lights of New Birmingham's factories and shipyards, burning bright against the darkness. It was not the crystal spires of Dracarys Prime, but it was something better. It was a place where a young dragon who had been nobody's wanted child could finally belong. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, and the first stars were becoming visible through the breaking clouds. Zara closed her eyes and let herself imagine tomorrow working alongside Marcus, learning new skills, proving that the council had been wrong about her worth. For the first time in her life, she fell asleep looking forward to what came next. The morning light filtering through the workshop windows was pale and industrial, nothing like the golden crystal light of Dracarys Prime. But, as Zara stretched her small wings and felt the warmth of the heated apartment around her, she decided she preferred this gray human dawn to all the beautiful sunrises of her homeworld. Marcus was already awake, moving quietly around the kitchen so as not to disturb her. The smell of brewing coffee and cooking breakfast filled the air, along with the distant hum of machinery from the workshop below. These were the sounds and smells of a working life, productive and purposeful. Good morning, Marcus called softly when he noticed her stirring. How did you sleep? Better than I have in months, Zara replied honestly. She had expected nightmares about the council or anxiety about her uncertain future, but instead she had slept deeply and peacefully for the first time since her exile. Excellent. I made eggs and toast, and I wasn't sure what dragons usually eat, so I also prepared some fruit and a small piece of meat. Marcus gestured to a plate he had prepared with careful attention to portion sizes appropriate for someone her size. The consideration in that simple gesture almost overwhelmed her. No one had ever bothered to learn what she preferred or needed. The council had simply provided standard dragon rations and expected her to be grateful. Here was this human who barely knew her, already thinking about her comfort and preferences. "Thank you," she said, settling at the table where he had placed a small cushion to boost her height. "Marcus, about yesterday. I meant what I said about wanting to try being your partner. But I don't know anything about human engineering or the work you do." Marcus sat down across from her with his own plate and coffee cup. "That's fine. I don't know anything about dragon sensory abilities or precise flame control. We'll teach each other." He pulled out a tablet and began showing her images of various projects he had worked on. Zara's eyes widened as she realized the sophistication of his equipment and designs. These were not primitive human contraptions, but cutting-edge technology that would impress engineers on any civilized world. "This is a custom gravity compensator I built for a cargo hauler," Marcus explained, pointing to a complex device that looked like a metallic flower with crystalline components at its center. The ship's original compensator kept failing because it couldn't handle the stress of loading and unloading heavy equipment. I redesigned the power distribution system and added redundant control circuits. "How do you test something like that?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. The device looked incredibly intricate, with dozens of components that would need perfect synchronization. Very carefully, Marcus laughed. "And usually with a lot of trial and error. That's where your electromagnetic sensing could be incredibly valuable. Instead of running diagnostics for hours to find a fault, you could potentially pinpoint the problem in minutes." He swiped to another image, showing a sleek fusion torch that was clearly not standard human technology. "This is something I'm particularly proud of. A client needed a cutting tool that could slice through composite armor without damaging the electronics underneath. Too much heat ruins the circuits, too little heat won't cut the armor." Zara studied the device with growing excitement. "You'd need incredibly precise temperature control for something like that. And you'd need to be able to sense the exact moment when the armor is cut through so you don't damage what's underneath." "Exactly." Marcus's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "I managed to build a solution, but it took me 3 months of calibration and testing. With your flame control and sensing abilities, I could probably build something 10 times more effective." As they continued looking through his portfolio, Zara began to understand the true scope of what Marcus accomplished in his small workshop. He was not just fixing broken equipment, he was solving problems that major corporations couldn't solve, creating custom solutions for clients throughout this sector of space. "Marcus," she said slowly, "why do you work alone? With skills like this, you could have a position at any major engineering firm in the galaxy. You could work for the Centaurian Corporate Alliance or the Altarian Technical Institute." Marcus's expression grew somber. "I used to work for larger organizations. But I learned something about corporate culture that I didn't like. They're more interested in profit margins than elegant solutions. They want fast, cheap fixes that will last just long enough to avoid warranty claims." He gestured around the small apartment and workshop. "Here, I can take the time to build things right. I can work on projects that interest me, help clients who really need custom solutions. And I can make my own decisions about who I work with and how I treat them." There was something deeper in his voice, some old pain that he was not quite ready to share. Zara recognized the tone because she had heard it in her own voice when talking about the council. Marcus had his own story of rejection and disappointment, his own reasons for choosing independence over belonging to a larger community. "What kind of project are you working on now?" she asked, sensing it was time to change the subject. Marcus's mood brightened immediately. "Something really interesting. A salvage crew found an old ship drifting in deep space, probably been abandoned for decades. The ship itself is worthless, but it's carrying cargo containers with some kind of advanced technological components that no one can identify." He pulled up holographic images from his tablet, showing strange crystalline devices that seemed to pulse with internal energy. "The salvage captain wants me to figure out what these things are and how they work without damaging them. If they're valuable enough, it could make everyone involved very wealthy." Zara leaned closer to study the images, her electromagnetic senses tingling even from the holographic representations.
There was something familiar about the energy patterns she could see in the crystals, something that reminded her of the deep caverns beneath Dracaris Prime where the ancient dragon artifacts were kept. These look like quantum resonance matrices, she said without thinking, then stopped in surprise at her own words.
How did she know that? Marcus stared at her with amazement. Quantum resonance matrices? I've never heard that term before. How do you know what they are? Zara frowned, trying to access memories that seemed frustratingly distant. I'm not sure.
There were things in the deep caverns on Dracaris Prime, artifacts from the old times before dragons joined the galactic community. The council never let young dragons near them, but sometimes I would sneak down to look. She closed her eyes, concentrating on the half-remembered images. The archives said they were built by the predecessors, the civilization that existed before any of our current species achieved spaceflight. Most of their technology was lost when their empire collapsed, but sometimes pieces of it are found in derelict ships or abandoned colonies.
Jesus, Marcus breathed. Predecessor technology?
If that's really what this is, we're talking about artifacts that are potentially worth more than most planetary economies. He stood up and began pacing again, his mind clearly racing with possibilities.
Zara, if you can really identify predecessor technology, that changes everything. There are treasure hunters and archaeologists who spend their entire lives searching for even tiny fragments of their artifacts.
But we have to be careful, Zara added, remembering more details from the restricted archives she had glimpsed. Predecessor technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also dangerous if handled incorrectly. Their quantum matrices were designed to interface with consciousness itself, and activating them without proper knowledge can cause problems. Marcus turned to look at her with a mixture of excitement and concern.
What kind of problems?
Mental feedback loops, temporal distortions, reality fluctuations. The archives mention cases where entire research teams disappeared after attempting to study active predecessor artifacts without proper safeguards. This revelation seemed to sober Marcus considerably.
Well, that definitely complicates things.
But it also makes your knowledge even more valuable. If you can help us identify safe ways to study these artifacts, we could make the discovery of a lifetime while avoiding the dangers. The rest of the morning passed quickly as they discussed the technical challenges of analyzing unknown technology safely.
Zara found herself contributing ideas and insights that impressed even herself.
Marcus was right, she did have valuable knowledge and abilities that had been dismissed by the council as worthless. Around midday, the workshop's communication system chimed with an incoming call. Marcus activated the video display, revealing a weathered human woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus, it's Captain Rodriguez from the salvage vessel Meridian. I'm calling about those artifacts we discussed.
Have you made any progress on identifying them?
Actually, I have some excellent news, Marcus replied. I've acquired a consultant with specialized knowledge of ancient technologies.
We believe your artifacts may be predecessor quantum resonance matrices.
The captain's eyes widened with shock and unmistakable greed.
Predecessor tech? Are you certain?
We need to examine the actual artifacts to be sure, but the preliminary identification is very promising. However, if we're right about what they are, we'll need to take special precautions. Predecessor technology can be extremely dangerous if mishandled. Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. I've heard the stories. Half my crew wants to jettison the containers rather than risk whatever killed the original owners of that derelict ship. Marcus glanced at Zara, who nodded encouragingly. If you're willing to bring the artifacts here, my consultant and I can perform a safe analysis. We'll determine exactly what you found and how to handle it properly. Your consultant, the captain asked, suspicion creeping into her voice.
What species?
I've dealt with supposed experts before who turned out to be frauds.
Zara stepped into the camera's view, ignoring the surprised look on the captain's face when she saw a young dragon.
I am Zara, formerly of the Dracaris Prime archives. I have studied predecessor artifacts and their historical context. It was not entirely a lie, though she was stretching the truth considerably. But something about the captain's expression suggested that the bluff would work.
A dragon archivist, Rodriguez mused. That's unexpected.
But dragons do have long memories and access to historical records that most species don't. All right, I'll bring the containers to your workshop, but I want hazard insurance and a strict containment protocol. Agreed, Marcus said immediately.
We'll have everything prepared for a safe examination by tomorrow morning.
After the call ended, Marcus turned to Zara with a grin that was equal parts excitement and nervousness.
Well, partner, looks like we're about to have our first real case together. Are you ready for this? Zara felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with healthy fear.
This was exactly the kind of challenge she had dreamed of, the chance to prove that her knowledge and abilities had real value.
I'm ready.
But, Marcus, we need to prepare very carefully. If I'm right about what those artifacts are, tomorrow could be the most dangerous day of our lives.
Or the most profitable, Marcus added with a laugh.
But, you're right about being careful.
Let's spend the rest of today setting up proper containment fields and safety protocols.
I'd rather be over-prepared for a minor discovery than under-prepared for the find of the century. As they began planning their approach to analyzing the mysterious artifacts, Zara felt a deep satisfaction settling in her chest. For the first time in her life, her knowledge was valued, her insights were respected, and her contributions mattered. The young dragon who had been cast out as defective was about to help solve one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries. And she was doing it alongside a human partner who saw her not as a failure, but as an equal. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it as part of a team, with someone who believed in her abilities and trusted her judgment. That alone was worth more than all the crystals and gold on Dracaris Prime. That afternoon, Marcus began teaching Zara about human engineering principles while she shared what she remembered about ancient dragon lore and predecessor mythology. They worked side by side, preparing containment equipment and safety protocols, and Zara discovered that she had an intuitive understanding of how different technologies interfaced with each other. "You're a natural at this," Marcus told her as she successfully calibrated a quantum field generator on her first attempt.
"Have you ever considered that maybe the Council's idea of what makes a good dragon was just wrong?"
Zara paused in her work, considering the question seriously.
"I'm starting to think that maybe being different isn't the same as being defective. Maybe I was just meant for a different kind of life than what dragons usually choose."
"Exactly," Marcus said with satisfaction. "Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the people who don't fit the normal patterns, who see things from angles that others miss."
As evening fell over New Birmingham, Zara looked around the workshop that was rapidly becoming her home and felt a contentment she had never experienced before.
Tomorrow would bring unknown dangers and incredible opportunities, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged. Working alongside a human engineer who valued her mind, preparing to unlock secrets that had been hidden for millennia, the young dragon who had once whispered "nobody wants me" was finally learning what it felt like to be essential. Captain Rodriguez arrived at dawn with a security detail and 3 massive cargo containers that hummed with barely contained energy.
Even through the reinforced walls of Marcus's workshop, Zara could feel the quantum resonance patterns pulsing like a cosmic heartbeat.
The sensation was both familiar and deeply unsettling, stirring memories she could not quite grasp. "These containers have been sealed since we pulled them from the derelict," Rodriguez explained as her crew carefully maneuvered the heavy units into the workshop's main bay. "We lost 2 good people exploring that ship before we decided to stop poking around and bring everything to experts." Marcus exchanged a meaningful look with Zara. The captain's words confirmed their worst fears about the dangers involved, but also validated their careful approach to the analysis.
"What happened to your people?"
Zara asked quietly, her electromagnetic senses already picking up troubling anomalies from the sealed containers.
Rodriguez's weathered face grew grim. "Jenkins and Kozlov were part of our technical team.
They went to examine some kind of control room deep in the ship's core. We lost contact with them, and, when we sent a search party, we found traces."
"Traces?" Marcus prompted. "Ash, mostly. Perfectly human-shaped piles of ash, like they'd been incinerated from the inside out."
But the strange thing was that nothing else in the room showed any heat damage. Whatever got them was precise and selective. Zara shivered, remembering warnings from the Dragon archives about predecessor security systems that could distinguish between authorized and unauthorized users with deadly accuracy.
"Captain, did your people touch anything in that control room? Any panels, crystals, or metallic surfaces?" According to the survivors, Jenkins activated what looked like a control console.
The lights in the room came on, some kind of holographic display appeared, and then Rodriguez shrugged helplessly.
"That's when they lost contact."
Marcus was already checking their containment equipment, his expression focused and professional.
But Zara could sense his underlying tension through the electromagnetic fields of his various implanted medical devices. He was as nervous as she was, just better at hiding it. 3 months had passed since Zara's transformation, and the small workshop in New Birmingham had become the most sought-after research facility in this sector of the galaxy. Word of the predecessor consciousness matrices had spread through academic and commercial channels, bringing a steady stream of visitors who wanted to study the ancient technology or hire Marcus and Zara's unique expertise. But success brought its own challenges, as Zara discovered when she detected the familiar quantum signature of a dragon ship approaching New Birmingham's orbital platform. "Marcus," she called from her position at the workshop's sensor array, "we have visitors." Dragon diplomatic vessel, bearing the seal of the High Council. Marcus looked up from the delicate quantum resonator he was calibrating with Zara's enhanced guidance. Their latest project involved creating safe interface protocols that would allow other species to benefit from predecessor technology without the catastrophic failures that had killed Rodriguez's crew members. "The same council that exiled you?" he asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that Zara had learned to recognize. Her human partner had developed very strong opinions about any organization that had mistreated her. "The very same," Zara confirmed, her enhanced senses picking up the specific energy patterns of council vessels. "And they're requesting immediate audience with the predecessor interface specialist mentioned in the recent academic publications." They had been careful not to use Zara's real name in any of their published research papers, referring to her only as an anonymous consultant with specialized knowledge of ancient dragon lore. But apparently the council had connected the dots and realized that the mysterious expert helping to unlock predecessor secrets was their own defective exile. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked, his tone making it clear that the decision was entirely hers. "We could claim the consultant is unavailable, or arrange to meet them somewhere neutral." Zara considered her options while monitoring the dragon ship's approach. Part of her wanted to hide, to avoid confronting the beings who had caused her so much pain. But a larger part of her, the part enhanced by predecessor knowledge and strengthened by months of working as Marcus's equal partner, was curious to see how the council would react to her transformation. "Let them come," she decided. "But we meet them here, on our territory, with our rules." An hour later, 3 imposing figures materialized in the workshop's receiving area in a shimmer of teleportation energy. Elder Counselor Draconis, a massive silver dragon whose scales sparkled like starlight, stood flanked by 2 smaller but still impressive council members that Zara recognized from her exile proceedings. The contrast between her current situation and her last encounter with these beings was striking. 3 months ago, she had stood before them as a frightened child pleading for acceptance. Now she faced them as an equal, enhanced by ancient knowledge and supported by a partner who valued her contributions. "So," Elder Draconis rumbled, his voice carrying the arrogance that Zara remembered all too well, "the defective hatchling has managed to stumble onto something valuable after all." Marcus stepped forward before Zara could respond, his posture radiating controlled anger. "I'll ask you to watch your tone when addressing my partner. This is our facility, and Dr. Zara is here by invitation and respect, not by your questionable judgment." The dragons stared at the human in obvious surprise. Clearly, they had not expected a primitive species member to speak to them with such authority, especially in defense of a dragon they had dismissed as worthless. "Your partner?" Elder Counselor Pythoness hissed, her green scales rippling with disdain. "This human considers himself equal to dragonkind?" "This human," Zara said quietly, stepping up beside Marcus, "values intelligence, creativity, and dedication over accident of birth or conformity to arbitrary standards. Unlike certain councils I could mention." The change in her voice and bearing was immediately apparent to the visiting dragons. This was not the cowering exile they remembered, but a being who radiated confidence and power that even their enhanced senses could detect. "You have been altered," Elder Draconis observed, his massive head tilting as he studied her with new attention. "Your electromagnetic signature has changed dramatically. What have you done to yourself?" "I've become what dragons were always meant to be," Zara replied calmly. "The predecessors designed our species to interface with their technology, to inherit their legacy of knowledge and capability. I'm simply fulfilling our original purpose." She gestured to the workshop around them, where predecessor matrices hummed quietly in their containment fields and human-built equipment interfaced seamlessly with ancient technology. "This is what cooperation between species can achieve. This is what we could all accomplish if we focused on capability instead of conformity." Elder Pythoness snorted dismissively. "Impossible."
Dragons have no connection to the predecessors beyond the legends and myths recorded in our oldest archives.
Would you like me to prove it?
Zara asked, her enhanced consciousness already reaching out to interface with the nearby matrices. At her mental command, the quantum crystals began glowing softly, their harmonic frequencies creating a complex melody that resonated through the workshop. But, more impressively, holographic displays materialized in the air around them, showing star charts and genetic analysis data that made all three council members step back in shock. The information was in ancient dragon script, but updated with modern galactic notation that made its meaning unmistakable.
These are the predecessor genetic modification records, Zara explained as the displays rotated slowly through detailed biological schematics.
They show exactly how they guided dragon evolution on Dracoris Prime, enhancing our electromagnetic sensitivity and quantum consciousness compatibility.
We're not just another species that stumbled onto their artifacts, we're their chosen successors. Elder Draconis was studying the displays with obvious fascination and growing excitement.
Despite his previous arrogance, he was scholar enough to recognize the significance of what he was seeing. If this is authentic, he said slowly, then it changes everything we thought we knew about dragon history and our place in the galaxy.
Oh, it's authentic, Marcus interjected with obvious satisfaction. We've spent months verifying every detail with multiple independent sources.
Your defective exile has discovered the most important archaeological find in galactic history. The third council member, Elder Ignitus, finally spoke up.
Why are you sharing this information with us? After your exile, you would have every right to keep these discoveries to yourself. Zara considered the question carefully before answering.
The honest truth was that she had no desire for revenge against the council, despite the pain they had caused her. Her time with Marcus had taught her that holding on to anger only poisoned the person carrying it. Because this knowledge belongs to all dragons, not just to me, she said finally. The predecessors intended for our entire species to benefit from their legacy, not just the ones who happen to fit traditional expectations. She paused, then added with quiet steel in her voice, but I won't be returning to Dracoris Prime to share it. My home is here now, with my partner, doing work that actually matters. Elder Draconis looked around the workshop with new eyes, taking in the sophisticated equipment and the obvious signs of successful collaboration between human and dragon engineering.
Perhaps arrangements could be made.
A formal research partnership between the council and your facility here. You would retain autonomy over your work, but with funding and resources that would allow you to expand your research significantly.
Marcus and Zara exchanged glances, communicating volumes in a single look.
They had discussed this possibility before, knowing that the Dragon Council's eventual involvement was probably inevitable once word of their discoveries spread. We'd need certain conditions, Marcus said carefully. Full editorial control over our research publications, the right to choose our own staff and collaborators, and absolutely no interference with our operational decisions.
And formal recognition that my exile was based on flawed judgment, Zara added. I won't work with an organization that officially considers me defective, no matter what resources they offer. The dragons conferred in rapid, hushed tones before Elder Draconis nodded reluctantly. Those terms are acceptable. The council recognizes that our previous assessment of your capabilities was incomplete. It was not exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement that they had been wrong. For Zara, it was enough. There's one more condition, she said, surprising everyone including Marcus. Any dragon who doesn't fit traditional expectations, who's too small, too weak, too different, gets referred to our program instead of being exiled. We'll find ways to use their unique capabilities, whatever those might be. Elder Pythonus bristled at the suggestion. You want us to send our rejects to work with humans? I want you to send your unrecognized talents to work with beings who will value them properly, Zara corrected firmly. And, if that bothers you, then, you haven't learned anything from this conversation. Marcus grinned proudly at his partner's negotiating skills. The young dragon who had once begged for acceptance was now dictating terms to the same council that had cast her out. Over the following weeks, the partnership took shape slowly and carefully. The Dragon Council provided funding and access to historical archives that had been closed to outsiders for millennia. In return, Marcus and Zara shared their interface protocols and safety procedures, allowing other researchers to study predecessor technology without the catastrophic failures that had plagued earlier attempts. But, the most rewarding aspect of the arrangement was watching young dragons arrive at their facility, beings who had been deemed unsuitable for traditional dragon society but, who thrived in an environment that valued innovation over conformity. There was Ember, whose flame burned too hot for conventional dragon work but, who became a master at predecessor energy manipulation. There was Sage, whose small size had made her a laughingstock on Dracaris Prime but, whose ability to interface with quantum systems rivaled even Zara's enhanced capabilities. Each new arrival reminded Zara of her own journey from unwanted exile to valued partner, and reinforced her belief that diversity of thought and capability was a strength, not a weakness. One evening, as she and Marcus worked late in their expanded laboratory, now staffed with a mix of humans, dragons, and other species, Zara reflected on how far she had come since that night she had whispered "Nobody wants me" in an abandoned warehouse. "Having any regrets?" Marcus asked, noticing her contemplative mood as they calibrated another quantum interface array. "About what?" she replied, genuinely puzzled. "About not returning to Dragon Society when you had the chance. You could be living in crystal spires instead of industrial workshops, respected as a great discoverer instead of working with primitive humans." Zara looked around their laboratory, taking in the sight of multiple species working together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to accomplish alone. Near one workstation, a young dragon was teaching a human engineer how to sense electromagnetic fields. At another, a Centaurian physicist was learning predecessor mathematical principles from one of the quantum matrices. "Marcus," she said with deep contentment, "I'm exactly where I belong." Outside their windows, the lights of New Birmingham stretched toward the horizon, a testament to the power of industry and cooperation. Above them, ships from dozens of worlds came and went from the orbital platform, carrying news of their discoveries to every corner of the galaxy. But, inside their laboratory, the young dragon who had once been nobody's wanted child continued her work alongside the human engineer who had given her a home, building a future where being different was not just accepted, but celebrated. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 2 years after the Council's visit, the Chanzara Research Institute had become the most important technological development center in human space. What had started as a small workshop in New Birmingham had expanded into a sprawling complex of laboratories, workshops, and training facilities that attracted the brightest minds from across the galaxy. But success had also attracted unwanted attention. Zara detected the threat long before the hostile ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Birmingham system. Her enhanced senses, now fully integrated with the facility's defensive systems, picked up the quantum distortions that preceded an attack fleet's arrival. "Marcus," she called out, her voice carrying the subtle harmonics that indicated her full integration with the predecessor interface systems. "We have company. 3 dreadnoughts and, at least 20 escort vessels. Configuration suggests hegemony military." The hegemony was a collection of aggressive species that viewed human expansion and technological advancement as a threat to their own dominance in this sector of the galaxy. They had been making increasingly hostile statements about the dangerous proliferation of predecessor technology and the unnatural alliance between primitive humans and rogue dragons. Marcus looked up from the quantum computing array he was fine-tuning with the help of Ember, whose precisely controlled flame had proven invaluable for delicate energy work. "How long until they reach orbital range?" 18 minutes at their current speed, Zara replied, her consciousness simultaneously monitoring the approaching fleet, the facility's defenses, and the dozens of researchers currently working in the complex. "But, Marcus, their lead ship is broadcasting hegemony admiral identification codes. This isn't a raid or intimidation run, they're here to destroy us completely." The significance of this was not lost on anyone in the laboratory. Hegemony admirals commanded massive fleets and had the authority to glass entire planets if they deemed it necessary for galactic security. Their arrival meant that someone very powerful had decided the Institute represented an unacceptable threat. "Evacuation protocols?" asked Sage, the small dragon who had become their expert in defensive applications of predecessor technology. "No time," Marcus said, his mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had served him well during his years working in dangerous environments. "Even if we started evacuating now, they'd be in weapons range before we could get everyone clear. Then, we fight," Ember stated simply, her too-hot flame flaring with anticipation. The young dragon had embraced her role as the Institute's primary defensive specialist, developing new applications for her unique abilities that the Dragon Council could never have imagined. Zara was accessing deeper levels of the predecessor systems, her consciousness expanding to encompass not just the Institute's defenses but the entire network of quantum matrices they had established throughout the New Birmingham system. What she found there filled her with both hope and trepidation. "We have capabilities they don't know about," she announced. "Over the past 2 years, we've been integrating predecessor defensive technology with human engineering principles. We're not just a research facility anymore, we're a fortress that can defend itself." Marcus smiled grimly as he activated the Institute's emergency protocols. Throughout the complex, blast doors sealed critical areas while defensive systems that looked like ordinary research equipment revealed their true nature. What the hegemony expected to find was a collection of scientists and engineers hiding behind conventional shields and weapons. What they would actually face was something unprecedented in galactic military history. "All non-essential personnel to the deep shelters," Marcus ordered over the facility-wide communication system. "Combat teams to your assigned stations." This is not a drill. The combat teams were an innovation that had emerged naturally from their diverse research staff. Humans provided tactical thinking and adaptability, dragons offered electromagnetic sensing and precise energy manipulation, while researchers from other species contributed their own unique advantages. They had been training together for months, developing cooperative techniques that none of their individual species could achieve alone. As the hegemony fleet moved into attack position, Admiral Karstock of the Thrakkery Dominion prepared to demonstrate why his species had remained militarily dominant for over a millennium. The humans and their pet dragons had been allowed to play with ancient technology for too long, and their discoveries were beginning to upset the careful balance of power that kept the hegemony in control. "Target all major structures," he commanded from his flagship's bridge. "I want nothing left that could continue their research. Send a message to any other species that might consider cooperating with humanity." But, as his fleet's sensors swept the Institute complex, Karstock began to notice anomalies that troubled him. The energy readings from the facility were far higher than any research installation should require, and the quantum signatures were unlike anything in his extensive military database. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported with obvious confusion, "the target is powering up systems that read like military-grade defensive arrays. Our intelligence indicated this was a civilian research facility." "Impossible," Karstock snarled. "Humans don't have technology advanced enough to threaten our vessels." "Begin the bombardment." The first salvo of plasma cannon fire streaked toward the Institute at significant fractions of light speed, enough destructive energy to level a small city. But, instead of striking buildings and workshops, the attack encountered something that should not have existed. A quantum barrier materialized around the entire complex, not the crude energy shields that most species used, but a sophisticated distortion field that bent spacetime itself. The plasma bolts struck the barrier and simply vanished, their energy absorbed and redirected into harmless forms. "What in the void was that?" Karstock demanded, his confidence beginning to waver. On the Institute's command deck, Zara monitored the effectiveness of their defenses while Marcus coordinated their response teams. The barrier was one of their newest innovations, combining predecessor quantum manipulation technology with human engineering principles to create protection that was virtually impenetrable by conventional weapons. "Their first attack was completely neutralized," Zara reported. "But the barrier requires enormous energy to maintain. We can't keep this up indefinitely." "Then, we don't stay on defense," Marcus replied, activating systems that most of their own staff didn't know existed. "Time to show them what cooperation between species can really accomplish." Throughout the Institute complex, hidden weapon systems began emerging from what had appeared to be ordinary research equipment. But these were not conventional weapons, they were applications of predecessor technology that had been refined and improved by the combined expertise of multiple species working together. Ember took position at what looked like a standard quantum furnace but was actually a focused energy projection system that could channel her precise flame control across interplanetary distances. Sage interfaced directly with a predecessor consciousness matrix, her small size allowing her to establish deeper connections than even Zara could achieve. Human engineers managed targeting systems while dragon researchers provided real-time sensor data. "Engaging target priority alpha," Ember announced, her flame flaring as she channeled energy through the modified projection system. A beam of coherent plasma, controlled with surgical precision, reached out from the Institute toward Karstock's flagship. But, instead of striking the heavily armored hull, it found the ship's main reactor containment system and delivered exactly enough energy to cause a controlled shutdown without triggering an explosion. The massive dreadnought went dark, its weapons offline and its engines dead. "Impossible," Karstock whispered, staring at displays that showed his flagship completely disabled by a single, precisely targeted shot from a research facility.
Target priority beta, Sage called out, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep integration with predecessor systems. The quantum matrix she was interfaced with began manipulating spacetime around the escort vessels, creating localized distortion fields that disrupted their formation and knocked several ships off course. Marcus watched the tactical display with satisfaction as their coordinated defense demonstrated principles that no single species had ever mastered. Human adaptability, dragon precision, and predecessor technology working together in ways that multiplied each component's effectiveness. Admiral, his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic, were receiving a transmission from the facility. Marcus's image appeared on the Hegemony flagship's main screen, flanked by Zara and several other researchers representing different species. His expression was calm but implacable, the look of someone who held overwhelming advantages and knew how to use them. Admiral Karstock, Marcus said politely, I'm Marcus Chen, director of this research facility. You've just attacked a civilian installation without provocation, which by galactic law constitutes an act of war. You're human, Karstock sputtered, still trying to process how his advanced military fleet had been neutralized by what his intelligence reports claimed was a primitive species. That's right. And these are my partners and colleagues from several other species, working together on research that benefits everyone in the galaxy. Marcus gestured to the diverse group around him. What you've just experienced is what cooperative development can achieve when species work together instead of trying to dominate each other. Karstock's tactical training finally overcame his shock. You may have disabled some of our ships, but you can't have gotten all of them. I still have enough firepower to destroy your facility. Actually, you don't, Zara interjected, her enhanced consciousness already monitoring every ship in the Hegemony fleet. While we were talking, our defensive systems have been systematically disabling your remaining vessels. You currently have 3 escort ships with minimal weapons capability and no viable retreat route. To confirm her statement, several more Hegemony vessels suddenly went dark as their power systems were remotely shut down by precisely targeted energy beams. This is impossible, Karstock repeated, his worldview crumbling as he watched his supposedly superior fleet being dismantled by beings he had considered inferior. No, Admiral, Marcus corrected gently. This is what happens when species stop fighting each other and start working together. What you call impossible is just the beginning of what cooperative civilizations can achieve. Over the following hours, as Hegemony rescue ships arrived to collect the disabled fleet, word of the incident spread throughout the galaxy. The news that a human research facility had single-handedly defeated an entire Hegemony attack fleet sent shockwaves through every military establishment in known space. But, more important than the military implications was the message the victory sent about cooperation between species. The Chanzara Institute had not won through superior aggression or ancient technology alone, they had succeeded by combining the best qualities of multiple civilizations into something greater than the sum of its parts. Do you think this will change anything? Zara asked Marcus as they watched the last of the disabled Hegemony ships being towed away. Marcus considered the question while reviewing reports from their research teams, many of whom had continued working throughout the battle, confident in their defensive capabilities. I think it already has. We've proven that cooperation is not just morally superior to domination, it's practically more effective. He gestured toward the communication display showing incoming messages from research institutions, governments, and individual scientists across the galaxy. Look at that. Hundreds of requests for partnerships, technology exchanges, collaborative research projects. Word is getting out that there's an alternative to the old patterns of conquest and subjugation. Zara smiled, remembering the frightened exile she had been just a few years ago. The Dragon Council would never believe how far this has all come. Speaking of the council, Marcus said with amusement, we received a formal communication from them an hour ago. They're requesting permission to establish a permanent diplomatic embassy here, and they want to discuss expanding our refugee program for non-traditional dragons. The irony was delicious. The same council that had exiled Zara for being defective now wanted to align themselves with the institute that her supposed defects had made possible. What did you tell them? Zara asked. The same thing I tell everyone who wants to work with us, Marcus replied. Come with open minds, check your prejudices at the door, and be prepared to discover that cooperation is more powerful than domination. That evening, as the crisis passed and normal operations resumed throughout the institute, Zara stood in their original workshop where everything had begun. The space had been preserved exactly as it was on that first night when Marcus had found a frightened young dragon hiding behind rusted machinery.
The workshop was still functional, still used for small projects and training new researchers. But now it was also a reminder of how far they had all come, and proof that the most important discoveries often emerged from the most unlikely places. Marcus found her there, looking at the spot where she had once curled up in desperate loneliness, whispering that nobody wanted her. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from years before. Zara looked around the workshop, then, beyond it to the sprawling complex that had grown from their partnership. Through the windows, she could see researchers from dozens of species working together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to achieve. "Just one," she said softly. Marcus raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that being different wasn't a flaw to be fixed," she continued. "That cooperation wasn't weakness, and that the most important discoveries come from combining different perspectives instead of enforcing conformity." She turned to face her partner, the human engineer who had seen value in a broken young dragon when her own species had written her off as worthless. "But I don't regret anything that happened after you found me in this workshop," she added with deep contentment. "This is exactly where I belong, doing exactly the work I was meant to do, with exactly the partner I was meant to have." Outside their windows, the lights of New Birmingham stretched toward the horizon, but now they were joined by the gleaming spires of the expanded Institute complex. Ships from across the galaxy came and went from the orbital platforms, carrying news of cooperative breakthroughs and collaborative discoveries to every corner of known space. The young dragon who had once whispered "nobody wants me" in desperate loneliness had become the catalyst for a new era of galactic cooperation. And she had done it not by becoming what others expected her to be, but by embracing exactly who she was and finding a partner who valued those differences. In the end, that made all the difference in the universe. As they worked together late into the night, preparing for tomorrow's projects and planning new innovations that would benefit species across the galaxy, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From unwanted exile to valued partner, from frightened refugee to respected researcher, from defective dragon to bridge between civilizations. But the most important transformation had not been in her capabilities or status. It had been in her understanding of her own worth, and her realization that home was not a place but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. The young dragon who had been nobody's wanted child had finally learned the most important truth of all: she had always been exactly who she was meant to be. It had just taken finding the right partner to help her see it.